What's up guys, this is Cody Bidlow with ATHLETE.X coming at you with another video. Today we're going to be talking about plyometric training and how you can incorporate plyometric training into your sprint training program. Whether you're a sprinter or another type of athlete, this information will be pertinent, so make sure to take some notes. If you want to have a text version, you can check the link down below in the description, which will take you to my website where I have an article version of this video posted. Plyometric training is the second most specific type of training for a sprinter or any type of athlete who really depends on sprinting in their sport. You can break down plyometric training into 5 different categories. First, we have hops. These are going to be low amplitude jumps that are going to mainly focus on landing mechanics as well as strengthening the foot, creating some active stiffness in the ankle, and making you more prepared for more intense jumping exercises to come later in the training year. Then there are what I call jumps. These are going to be box jump type activities where you're jumping off the ground, mainly going to be vertically oriented, although you can do horizontally oriented variations of these as well. These are going to train the ability to put out one intense expression of power, such as in a box jump to a relatively high height. Then we have depth jumps. These are where you're going to jump off of an elevated surface, land on the ground with a very intense landing, and then use that to either train the ability to stick the landing or to transfer that into a jump up onto a box or out onto a box for a horizontally oriented depth jump. Then we have bounds. These are going to be focused on repeated single leg efforts. You can do them on double legs, but I think they're most effective in either an alternate leg or single leg bound type of exercise. These are going to develop elasticity around the hips, in the hamstrings, and improve the ability for the athlete to orient themselves in either a vertical or horizontal propulsive manner. Lastly, we have AthleanX Jumps. These are exercises that I've come up with that I think are useful if you're a sprinter or an athlete who sprints in their sport. They're going to target sprint-specific movement characteristics with a plyometric component added in. If you're new to training or getting back into training after a break, then hops are what you're going to need to focus on. These are mainly used to teach jumping and landing mechanics, active joint stiffness in the lower leg, and to strengthen the foot for more intense activities such as depth jumps. You can use different variations such as single leg or double leg hops. You can do them in place. You can do them moving along the ground, forward, backward, or side to side. And then you can also add a vertical component such as in a stiff ankle hop where you're trying to jump as high as you can, but without loading up into, say, a squat like you would in a counter movement jump or a box jump. You're just trying to use the elastic tissues of the lower leg, primarily the ankle and the knee, to hit the ground and bounce off of it. For most athletes, hops are going to be used as a preparatory activity so that eventually you can get into more intense activities. But for people who are new to training, this is going to be your bread and butter of what's teaching you how to land, how to absorb that force, and then put it back into the ground so you can jump or move in general in a way that is using the elastic tissues to your advantage. When the elastic tissues of the ankle, of the knee, of the hips are trained, you're going to use less effort to achieve the same type of force production. Because the elastic tissues are not having to work actively, meaning they're not using a bunch of energy, they're instead storing energy because of the type of tissue that it is. This can help make your speed endurance better. It can make you just more efficient overall as an athlete. So whatever type of athlete you are, hops are something you should incorporate in your program, especially if you're new to training, or if you're not new to training, you can still utilize them as warm-ups, as a culminating activity at the end of your session. There's really quite a number of different ways you can use hops to your advantage. Also, if you're recovering from injury, hopping exercises are a great way to reintroduce plyometrics without doing anything that is going to cause a high risk of injury or anything like that. The next category are jumps. These are going to be single effort, high intensity movements, primarily done from the ground up onto a box or jumping out into a sand pit. These are your typical box jumps, single leg box jumps, weighted box jumps, broad jumps, things like that. Jumps offer a good balance of low risk of injury, but high power production, high intensity efforts. So once you've progressed out of hops and you're now looking for something more intense, jumps are a great way to achieve that intensification that you're looking for. I would primarily focus on vertically oriented jumps. Although horizontally oriented jumps are great, the landing mechanics of them are very intense on the ankle, the knee, adductors, and some other areas of the body. So you want to make sure that wherever you're landing is relatively soft, or that you're really skilled at absorbing that force upon landing. As you can see, there's many different variations. Pick them according to what you're looking for and what you're trying to gain out of them. and also consider what you're trying to progress to next. So if you're trying to progress to a double leg depth jump with a vertical emphasis, then you should probably start with a box jump on 2 legs with a vertical emphasis. If you're a sprinter and you're relatively advanced, maybe you're going to do single leg box jumps, and those will progress to single leg depth jumps eventually. Consider where you want to go and use that as a way to figure out what you need to do now in order to get there in a way that is safe and effective. Depth jumps are where things are going to get a little bit more interesting, much more intense, and the risk of injury is going to increase. But with anything, risk and reward tend to be tied together. Ultimately, the goal of a depth jump is to overload the Golgi tendon organs and the muscle spindles, which act as sort of an overprotective mother, which is limiting your ability to produce force. Golgi tendon organs will sense how much tension is going through the musculotendinous unit, and when it senses that there's too much tension, it'll shut everything off, you'll crumple and fall to the ground because the body doesn't want to get injured. That's why if you jumped off your roof, you probably wouldn't stick the landing. You would fall over. You might break your leg too, but if you don't, you're at least going to collapse. The reason you're collapsing is because the Golgi tendon organs are sensing we're hitting the ground with way too much intensity. We can't handle this. We need to shut everything off and try to protect ourselves so we don't snap a tendon right off the bone. Well, you can train this organ, you can train these sensory organs to not kick in so early, so that way your body is able to absorb more force, and whatever you absorb, you can then put back out into the ground, into the track, or whatever. The result of this is that you're going to be able to jump higher and sprint faster when these adaptations occur. These sensory organs are going to kick in much earlier than your ultimate threshold of force absorption. So by training depth jumps, or if you're really new to training, simply doing stiff ankle hops, these types of exercises and these types of stressors on the body are going to help overload these systems and retrain the brain, retrain those reflexes as well, to make sure that you're able to handle a little bit more than what you might had you not used these exercises. So this is really the beauty of a depth jump, is that it's going to raise your fundamental capabilities regarding how much force you can absorb and put back out into the ground, which is going to raise your ability when you go to sprint or jump when you're on the basketball court, etc. Second to last category is bounds. Bounds are repeated efforts, usually done on one leg. Sometimes they can be done on 2 legs, such as a repeated broad jump, aka a double leg bound. But primarily we're going to use alternate leg bounds, single leg cycle bounds, left, right type of bounds, or something similar. These are going to help train elasticity in the hamstrings, in the hips, in the ankle, and they're going to pair that elastic training with moving horizontally over the ground. There's both a horizontal and a vertical component, but you can manipulate whether you want to do something more vertically oriented or more horizontally oriented depending on your goals. If you're a sprinter, obviously, you want to do a primarily horizontally oriented jump. If you do something else, such as you play basketball or volleyball, maybe when you do bounds, you're going to go for a more vertically oriented movement. It's up to you, it just depends on your specific goals. Because bounding exercises are going to train the elastic tissues around the hips, the knee joint, the ankle joint, in the hamstrings, you're going to be able to run with more efficiency. This can be useful for someone like a distance runner or someone who even runs the 100 meter, who needs to be using elastic tissues to their advantage, storing energy so they don't have to use as much muscular energy to power the movement. So if you're a distance runner, you might consider using bounds in your training program just as a sprinter would. You may not do them as much, you may not do them as quickly, but you could still benefit from these. And say you play soccer, you could also benefit from them. So these are not just specific to 100-meter sprinters, but they can be used in pretty much any type of athlete. It's just a matter of how relatable the movement is to your sport and how you can fit that into your training program in a way that is safe and effective. Because there's a horizontal and a vertical component, you're going to be able to train the athlete in a way that teaches them how to control where they're going. Do you want to propel more vertically? Do you want to propel more horizontally? Well, to learn that, you have to do it, and bounds are a great way to do that. They're also going to train the ability to produce power in a repeated fashion, so you could consider this as sort of a power endurance type of training. If you have an athlete such as a sprinter who tends to be a little bit too quick, not very patient in acceleration or at top speed, they could benefit from bounds as a way to train with a sort of constraint on how quickly they're getting off the ground. On the other hand, if you have someone who maybe they aren't very elastic, they tend to be a little bit tight and bound up, bounds can help train them to open up, get that knee to open, get that hip to open up on the backside, and then boom, bring those legs back down under you, switch sides, load up, boom, By doing that, by training that elastic motion, you're going to become more elastic overall. This is going to help prevent injury, and it's going to help you run faster when you go to do your speed work or your speed endurance work. Some examples of these can be double leg bounds, aka a repeated broad jump, alternate leg bounds, which is your typical bound that you think of. You could do a left, left, right, right type of exercise where you go on the left leg twice and the right leg twice, or different variations of that. You can also do single leg cycle bounds, so this is where you stay on one leg and repeatedly jump on that same leg, cycling the leg up and through until the next ground contact. You could do semi-straight leg or straight leg bounds to really target the hamstrings. And lastly, you can use sled resisted bounds if you feel you need to produce a little bit more power or add load because the athlete maybe doesn't quite get the horizontal propulsion aspect, so you want to add a sled to create an environmental constraint on the direction that they're moving. The last category are what I call ATHLETE.X jumps. These are jumps that I've come up with. I'm not saying nobody else in the world has ever done these or thought of them, but personally, I came upon these strictly through experimentation, not through seeing someone else do them. These are designed to focus on sprint-specific mechanics or movement patterns with a plyometric component. They can be used for developing acceleration, maximal velocity, and the tissues and the force output characteristics that are specific to those, as well as the positions that you're in. Depending on the exercise you choose, these can be focused on developing the power of the leg strike. These can be focused on elasticity during switching between limbs. These can be used to train the flexor, extensor, reflex, or just to increase coordinative demand on jumps that you already do. These are going to be most useful for athletes who already have some basic understanding of how to move, basic coordination, and basic ability to produce power. Some of these exercises, like the A-box strike jump, are going to be more useful for someone who's inexperienced, whereas something like the split leg A-cycle is going to be much more challenging for someone who doesn't have a lot of movement competence. So you have to, once again, pick which exercises are useful and effective for the population that you or your athletes are in, and then progress them over time toward the more complex exercises, toward the more intense exercises, as is appropriate for their level of development. Now, as with any type of training, progression is key. If you're not progressing things in a certain direction, it's not going to work out very well. So when it comes to plyometrics, here are some general guidelines you can use to guide your progression of the plyometric training that you incorporate in your training program. You can move from simple to complex exercises, so something like a box jump to a single leg box jump. That's going to be a progression in complexity. Similarly, a double leg to single leg transition will target certain things more specifically that a double leg exercise might not translate that well to something like sprinting because it's done on one leg at a time. So a single leg jump might be more specific. That is also one way you can progress. You can progress from lower impact to higher impact. A box jump is going to be less impact than a depth jump. You can go from more cushioned surfaces in footwear to less cushioned surfaces in footwear. So this might be going from running shoes on grass to running shoes on the track to spikes on the track. I'm not saying everyone can use spikes in plyometrics, but that's an example of how you can progress footwear as well as the surface used. You can go from hops to jumps, from jumps to depth jumps, from hops to bounds, or from jumps to bounds. You can go from single efforts to repeated efforts. Think of doing things that are easier to understand, easier to do, less taxing overall, to the things that are harder, more complex, or more taxing on the body. That's the general progression that you want to use over time as a way to continuously spur gains in the athlete without hurting them or without making them too tired or doing something that is ineffective simply because they're really not that capable of doing it in a way that is optimal for that specific movement. If you do a depth jump and you spend a whole second on the ground before you jump onto the box, you're probably not prepared to do depth jumps. So you'd get a lot more out of just a regular box jump. Similarly, if you're doing hops and you're about to train for the Olympics, maybe you should be doing something more advanced considering the level at which you are competing. So you have to once again consider, where am I at? How does it relate to my goals? Is it effective for what I'm doing? Is it too advanced for where I'm at, or is it too rudimentary and I need to do something more advanced? That's the discussion you have to constantly have with yourself when you're planning your training. In conclusion, it would be wise for any coach or athlete to incorporate some form of plyometric training into their program. It's just a matter of using the types of exercises that are most appropriate for where you're at in your career, where you're at in the training year, and what your specific goals are and the needs that you have. For me, Right now I'm focusing a lot on bounding exercises because I need to improve the elasticity of my adductors, of my hip flexors, of my hamstrings as a way to not only reduce injury, but also improve the efficiency of my sprinting when at top speed and during speed endurance. If I was 14 years old and just getting into running, well, I would probably focus just on hopping on 2 legs, hopping on 1 leg, hopping in place, hopping slowly but surely, 1 meter at a time each jump. But whatever level of training that you're at, whatever level of competence you're at, whatever level of performance you're at, you can use one of these variations of plyometric training in your sprint training program or in your soccer training program or whatever sport you play. You can use these to your advantage. Just focus on the things that are appropriate for where you're at, progress them over time, both in the short term and the long term, and you'll see a lot of benefit. Thank you guys for tuning into this video. I hope you got something out of it. While you're here, please hit a thumbs up, as that'll help tell YouTube, hey, this is a good video, and they'll show it to other people. Subscribe if you want to stay tuned for more content, and leave a comment if you have any questions or concerns. This is Cody Bidlow with AthleteX, signing off.